So what I'm going to talk to you today is about management of asthma oral to inhalation therapy. So the presentation today would be discussing on how to diagnose asthma, how to plan the treatment strategy, and how to go about with selecting the therapy for your patient. So before we start, we'll have a short introductory slide on what is asthma. So asthma is a chronic lung disease that inflames and narrows the airways. And the patient comes to you with complaints of wheezing, chest tightness, shortness of breath, coughing. This coughing might be more during night or in early morning. So these are the symptoms of asthma. So, what is the definition? So, according to the Global Initiative for Asthma, the definition says as it's an heterogeneous disease usually characterized by chronic airway inflammation, defined by the history of respiratory symptoms such as wheeze, shortness of breath, chest tightness, and cough that may vary over time and in intensity with a variable expiratory airflow limitation. This airflow limitation later may become persistent or permanent. So to understand asthma, we need to understand how the airways work. So the airways are small tubes that carry air from our mouth and nose into the lungs. So people who have asthma are the people who have inflamed airways, and the inflammation leads to swelling of these airways, and the airways become very sensitive. At times, there is a reaction to inhaled substances, and there is also mucus production. Continuing the pathophysiology, when the airways react, the muscles around them tighten, and this narrows the airways, causing less air to reach the lungs. The cells in the airways might make some mucus more than usual. The mucus is sticky, thick liquid that can further narrow the airways. So, what we understand here is that the patient is already feeling short of breath because there is less air reaching his or her lungs. And on top of this, when there is mucus production, the patient now is coughing up sputum, and there is all the more effort required to take a normal breath. So this chain reaction can result in all the symptoms of asthma, and symptoms can happen each time there is an inflammation of these airways. So this is a diagrammatic representation. You can see on the left is a figure which is figure A, which is an anatomical diagram showing the lungs and the airways. We can see that the trachea branches into right and left main bronchus, and then there is furthermore branching into smaller airways up to the distal portion of the lung. Now, when we see an individual airway, you can see the diagram stating B. So this is a normal airway. What you see here is the muscle with the airway wall. And in cross section, you can see the airway wall is relatively thinner over here. Coming to diagram C, this is the airway after a patient has symptoms of asthma. So the differences that you can make out here is that the muscle, that is the brown fiber over here, it has gotten tightened. So there is constriction of airways. There is inflammation and thickening of the airway wall. So the diameter and the size of the airway wall is now decreased because of thickening of the airway wall. And the cross section will show you that there's also mucus production. So compared to the cross section in diagram B, when you see the cross section in diagram C, there is relatively less space for air to come in and go out. There is thickened airway wall and there is mucus production. Similarly, when we go through the asthmatic alveoli, you can see over here that the red area, that is the inflamed airway, has gotten thickened airway walls, decreasing to a narrowing. There is a narrowing of the airway, and there is excess mucus production. The brown lines that you see here is the muscle which is now gotten tightened. So all of these leads to the symptoms of asthma. Now we'll go through etiology of asthma. Now this diagram might appear a bit complicated to you, but there are only three things to keep in mind. One is genetics, second is epigenetics, and third is environmental factors. So there is definitely a role of inheritance. So if the patient has a family history of asthma or allergy, if there's been any of the parent or grandparent or sibling who has asthma, so there is inherited epigenetic changes and genetic mutations which can cause a predisposition for developing asthma. Similarly, a person can have some environmental factors which can cause new epigenetic changes and trigger asthma in those who are already genetically predisposed. So that's why we always say while diagnosing asthma, we do always ask history of any family history of asthma or allergy. And there are also environmental factors. So you might come across a patient who's having symptoms for the past 1 year, and on asking leading questions whether if there's any change in environment, if the person has shifted from a relatively warmer area to a cooler city or a new environment. So these are the triggers which actually lead to the etiology of asthma. Now we come to understanding the triggers over here. You can see on the left are inflammatory factors, on the right is irritants, and below what you see are other factors. So every patient might have his or her own set of triggers, not necessary that every asthmatic patient has the same triggers. So some people might have triggers which include allergens, some people have respiratory infections as their trigger. There are various irritants which can lead to asthma, such as sudden change in temperature, humidity. Exercise itself can lead to asthma. Exposure to cold air, any kind of physical or mental stress, any variations in emotions. People, when they are exposed to strong odors such as perfumes or fumes from fuel like petrol, kerosene, people who are using tobacco, people who are on medications such as aspirin, NSAIDs, or on beta blockers. At times, food additives have been found to be triggers. Pollutants, so vehicular pollution and industrial pollution is also a trigger. And one thing that should never be forgotten is gastric reflux. So people who have obesity, people who have complaints of GERD are also prone to asthmatic episodes. We'll continue the same trigger. So we can see here allergic triggers and non-allergic triggers. So there's always a question, what is the difference between an allergic trigger and an irritant? So the difference between an allergen and an irritant is an allergen is something that induces a antibody response. It is an IgE mediated response in your body. Comparatively, an irritant is any physical substance which actually irritates your skin or mucosa, and not necessarily that there will be a IgE mediated response. So that is the difference between an allergen and a trigger. So the most common allergens that we come across in India is pollen and dust mite, and at times it can be hair from the pet, that is pet dander. And non-allergic triggers include vehicular pollution, exposure to smoke, that is secondhand smoke, and exposure to strong odors. Now we'll come to the clinical features of asthma. So as we had discussed before, a patient of asthma will present to you with complaints of wheezing, chest tightness, shortness of breath, and coughing, which might be more at night or during early morning. So coughing from asthma is often worse at night or early in the morning, making it hard for the patient to catch a good night's sleep. Wheezing is a whistling or a squeaky sound that comes out of the patient's airway when the patient is breathing. It is mostly audible to the doctor or the family members themselves, not only the patient. Chest tightness is a feeling of squeezing. Many times the patient might actually complain to you that ऐसा लगता है छाती पे कोई बैठा है, somebody is sitting on my chest. So that is a complaint of chest tightness. And the person might come with shortness of breath. So people might complain that they feel out of breath when they are doing regular work, like something that they're used to every day, like walking stairs or climbing up stairs. And at times they feel that they can't get air out of their lungs. So these are the clinical features for asthma. There are various clinical phenotypes which have been understood of asthma. These are often useful in planning the treatment strategy for patient. So the first and the most common phenotype is allergic asthma. So as we had discussed, patients who mount a IgE response, allergic response to triggers around them. there's a very important subset of asthmatics who are basically non-allergic, non-atopic. Then there is adult onset or late onset asthma. So you might come across patients who are being diagnosed as asthma, coming with symptoms at a very late stage of their life, uh, maybe in their 30s or 40s or even in their 50s. Then there is asthma with persistent airflow limitation. So these are the asthmatics who now have been asthmatic for a very long time, and now their airways are fixed airways. So what you see is that there is uh, the variability in their symptoms has reduced, and what they have now is persistent, continuous symptoms of asthma. There is less variability. They just complain of these symptoms all throughout the year. And there is another subset which is asthma with obesity, which is mostly related to reduced lung capacity and involvement of leptins. So asthma with obesity is another subset. Now we come to the various terminologies when it comes to treatment subsets of asthma. So there's uncontrolled asthma. So these are the patients who come with frequent symptoms or frequent exacerbation. So exacerbation is any acute increase in symptoms of cough, chest tightness, or breathing difficulty. And many of these patients may potentially have mild asthma and can be well controlled with low dose ICS if it is taken regularly. Difficult to treat asthma are the patients who have asthma which is uncontrolled despite prescribing high dose preventer treatment. The contributory factors here can be an incorrect diagnosis, presence of various other comorbidities, an incorrect inhaler technique on part of the patient, or poor adherence to the treatment on part of the patient. So this is called difficult to treat asthma. Mind you, these are not the difficult patients, it's the difficult to treat asthma. Then there is severe asthma, which has had many different meanings. And now it is defined as uncontrolled despite maximal optimized therapy and treatment of contributory factors, or the one that worsens when high dose treatment is decreased. So that is relatively refractory to the corticosteroids. It is rarely completely refractory. And a retrospective definition dependent on how thoroughly contributive factors are excluded. So this is a spirometric graph that is seen on your screen. On the left is a volume time graph. So on the x-axis, you can see is time in seconds. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds. And on the y-axis is the volume. So when we measure the volume at the first second is what we call as FEV1. So what you see, the green line basically shows you is the FEV1 for a normal person. When we consider a patient who has asthma before bronchodilator, what you see is the red line. So this is a point where you get the FEV1. And when this patient is given a bronchodilator, there is slight improvement in his lung functions. And what you see here is the blue line for asthma post bronchodilator. Similarly, on the right hand side, what you see is a graph of flow volume loop. The green line depicts the normal flow volume loop of a normal person. The red line shows a scooping of the graph, which is basically seen in patients of asthma. And when they are given bronchodilators, so the post bronchodilator, there is a relative improvement. It is still not up to normal, but better than pre-bronchodilator. So the blue line depicts you asthma, which is post-bronchodilator. Now there are various risk factors for exacerbation. So as I had discussed before, an exacerbation is an acute episode wherein there is increase in symptom of the patients, quite often due to any exposure to their particular trigger, or at times when they are not taking their medication properly. So what are the various risk factors for exacerbation? The first one mentioned here is any patient who's been intubated for asthma in the past, any patient who has uncontrolled asthma symptoms. So patients who are actually not having complete control in on their symptoms. Then patients who have had more than one exacerbation in the last 1 year. So they are actually people who are prone for another exacerbation. patients who are already having a very low FEV1. So we are supposed to measure their lung function at the start of the treatment, and then we are supposed to assess their best performance at around 3 to 6 months, and there to be followed by a periodical lung function assessment. So people who already have a very low lung function are the ones who can actually land up in an exacerbation. Patients who are with incorrect inhaler technique or having poor adherence. So this is where the doctor has a major role to play. So patients who are basically not taking their inhalers properly, patients who are not taking their medication properly. So these are the patients who need to be counseled a bit more. You need to give around 5 minutes more of your OPD time to such patients. Try to understand what exactly is the difficulty with their inhaler. If you can choose a better alternative, or if you can just correct their inhaler technique and understand their reasons for poor adherence. Also, patients who are smokers. So smokers are obviously having more chances of landing up in an exacerbation. And there are another subset of people who are obese, women in pregnancy, and people with blood eosinophilia. Now, managing asthma, oral versus inhalation route. So first we'll understand the pulmonary delivery of drugs. So the respiratory epithelial cell have a prominent role in the regulation of airway tone and the production of airway lining fluid. So in this respect, growing attention has been given to the potential of a pulmonary route as a non-invasive administration for both systemic and local delivery of therapeutic agents. Now, because of this high permeability and large absorptive surface area of the lungs, which is approximately 70 to 140 meters square in adult humans, and having extremely thin absorptive mucosal membrane and good blood supply, the alveolar epithelium of the distal lung has been shown to be an absorption site for most of the therapeutic and various macromolecules. So when it comes to delivery of drug, what we need is the right size of molecules which should reach to the distal end of the bronchial tree, having maximum absorption with the least side effect, thus helping for the local delivery of the therapeutic agent. So the advantage here is a comparatively low enzymatic activity. There is rapid absorption of drugs and the capacity for overcoming the first pass metabolism, which is through the lungs, through the liver. The local disorders and some systemic diseases are well treated by delivering the drug through pulmonary route. And this includes the topical treatment of asthma, COPD, local infectious diseases, and much more. Now, what you see here is a diagram of deposition of inhaled drugs. So you can see that the MDI is taken through the mouth and then it goes through the pharynx. So approximately 30 to 40% is what is inhaled into the lungs, and remainder is what is swallowed, goes to the GI tract, absorbed from the GI tract, passes the first pass metabolism, and then goes to the systemic circulation. So what are the advantages of inhalational uh, versus oral? So here what you can see in the diagram is drug delivery by inhalation is dispersed via aerosol. It is as rapid as IV injection and goes through the respiratory tract and pulmonary epithelium. Now it is as rapid as IV, but it is completely non-invasive. The examples are various inhalers such as albuterol, corticosteroid, and useful for patients with respiratory complaints. It is set directly to the site of action and minimizes the systemic side effects. A small chart showing you comparison between the advantages and the disadvantages. So the advantages with inhalation therapy is that it is a targeted drug delivery. So when you say it is targeted, so basically what we mean is we are actually targeting the site and we are reducing the side effects. And also the advantage with any targeted therapy is there are smaller doses required. So you can get the same result with smaller doses when you are following a targeted drug delivery therapy. there is a rapid onset of action. So whenever patient is having any exacerbation, so inhalational therapy is the first line of treatment, as it gives you a very rapid symptomatic relief. So the patient has rapid symptomatic relief with less side effects and requires very small doses. As mentioned earlier, this is a relatively less invasive portal. The disadvantages is you are not very sure as to how much of the dose is actually going inside the lungs, and there are variations with consistency. So every patient's use is variable when it comes to inhalational therapy. A tablet is ingested by a patient very easily, but the inhaler use depends on the age of the patient, the physical ability of the patient to actually inhale, the hand and breath coordination of the patient, the technique of the patient. So at times, if the patient is not following the right technique, the patient might be losing out on a lot of time and money, because he is actually taking the treatment, but the treatment is not actually working properly. So these are the various factors which lead to change in consistency when it comes to inhalational therapy. So what are the concerns for oral therapy? So now we are shifting focus to the concerns for oral therapy. When it comes to oral glucocorticoid, I suppose we are all very much aware that long-term oral glucocorticoid therapy is associated with serious adverse events, which includes osteoporosis and bone fracture. The oral corticosteroids also have the risk of developing infections. Patients who are diabetic, they might develop more infections. Then there is risk of osteoporosis, psychiatric disorders, when patients are on a very long-term uh, exposure to oral corticosteroid. So we have always been looking for effective corticosteroid sparing strategies. Coming to theophylline, it has a very narrow therapeutic window, and its interaction with various other drugs has led to limitation of its use. The serum theophylline concentration require monitoring directly to avoid toxicity. Some patients have experienced adverse effects at a very low plasma concentration. There are often CNS symptoms which are discussed by with the patient, which includes irritability, lightheadedness, dizziness. In severe cases, seizures have also been seen. And at high serum concentration, adenosine A1 receptor antagonism could lead to convulsions and cardiac arrhythmia. So these are relatively very severe side effects which cannot be overlooked while prescribing theophylline. So asthma exacerbation with theophylline is not a recommendation from the current clinical practice according to the 2018 GINA. Coming to doxophylline, there are various major and minor side effects which include nausea or vomiting, stomach ache, sleeplessness, headache, dizziness, increased heart rate, increased blood sugar level, and muscle weakness. Montelukast, recently FDA has boxed warning in 2020 about risk of serious neuropsychiatric events, including suicidal tendencies with Montelukast. So before prescribing Montelukast, health professionals should consider its benefits and risk, and patients should be counseled about the risk of the neuropsychiatric events. Now we are coming to the inhalational therapy. So the first inhalational therapy that we are discussing is the meter dose inhaler, or the PMDI, which is the pressurized meter dose inhaler. So it was in the 1950s that the PMDI was developed, and now PMDI has become a very important inhalational technique with annual sales currently in excess of 400 million units. The drug, of course, have been updated, and the propellant technology has been improved. Earlier, CFC used to be used, which was considered hazardous for the ozone layer, and now it has been replaced with less environmentally damaging HFAs. Then came the spin inhaler. So this was invented by Dr. Roger Alton-Yan. It was a capsule inhaler that used a small propeller to create turbulence. Uh, there was a need to find alternatives to the standard PMDI technology because the dose to be delivered exceeded the capability of PMDI metering valves. Sodium chromoglycate was launched in 1967 as a spin inhaler device, and some years later, the PMDI version was created using a lower dose. Something that we are all very much aware of is the Rotainhaler. It is a dry powder capsule inhaler requiring twisting of a loaded capsule so that the capsule is opened and the powder is inhaled through a mesh. So there are various parts in this rotahelix. There is a mouthpiece, there is a hole for inserting rota cap, and there is a rota chamber. We'll go through all the advantages and disadvantages of all these devices in the upcoming slides. Then came the Disc-Heller, which was an important step forward in inhalational therapy. It did not require reloading for every dose. So it was the first multi-unit dose dry powder inhaler. So the patient was saved from the cumbersome efforts of reloading the capsule every time. There was a cartridge with foil sealed pre-measured doses, and these are perforated at the time of use to permit the drug to be inhaled. Then a relatively newer and advanced device, which is the Turbohaler, which is also a breath accentuated powder dose inhaler. So subsequent development of these dry powder inhalers was followed by following three themes, which included capsule inhalers, so inhalers which require capsules to be inserted, capsules to be broken or opened, and then to be inhaled by the patient. Then the multiple unit dose inhalers and the reservoir devices. Now coming to the advantages and disadvantages, this can be reviewed under the compliance with inhalers, the pharmacokinetic issues, and the efficacy and safety. The advantages with the PMDI, that is the meter dose inhaler, it is very portable and compact. A patient can actually carry the MDI in his own pocket. It can be used quickly, so there's no need to insert a capsule and rotate the device. You can actually start pumping in the device as and when required. It is often the least expensive device when you consider the number of doses and the monthly expense for each device. There is no preparation of drug required. There is no chance of contamination of the content since the patient is not touching any of the contents inside. And with the newer HFA solutions, there is a very high lung deposition fraction. Now coming to dry powder inhalers, these also have their own advantages. So mostly useful for children above the age of 4 years. Before the age of 4 years, the child might not generate sufficient inspiratory flow to get the proper amount of drug delivery through a dry powder inhaler. So advantages here is that dry powder inhaler is breath actuated, so there is no need for the patient for having a hand and breath coordination compared to a PMDI device. There is absolutely no need for propellant in such device. It is also very portable and compact, can be carried in the pocket. It can be used quickly. Relatively, there is you need to insert a capsule. There is no preparation of drug required, and the dose counters are available in the newer designs that are available in the market. Coming to spacer and holding chamber. So this is another device which can be used above 4 years. And there is a valve inside the chamber. And for small children, what we use is basically a face mask, a child face mask. And this is indicated for patients who have difficulty performing adequate MDI technique. The advantage here is reduced need for coordination. So every time the patient is actually pumping the device, the drug is held up in the chamber and the patient can actually take a breath, not necessarily with the pumping, but a few seconds before or after the pumping. And there is reduced pharyngeal deposition. Now coming to nebulizers, there are advantages that the patient coordination is not required. You just need to plug in the machine and attach the mask to the patient's face. It is effective with basic tidal breathing also. You can administer multiple medications. So you can prepare the medicine, mix a few medication and administer at the same time. Dose modification is completely possible every time. And it can be used for any age group, right from small children to adults to geriatric population. So when it comes to asthma medication, we classify them into two categories. One is the controller medication and second is the reliever or the emergency medication. So controller medication are the medication which are taken daily on a long-term basis, which actually help you in controlling the symptoms through anti-inflammatory effects. So these are the medicines which are prescribed usually once daily or twice daily. They have an effect of 12 or 24 hours, and patients are supposed to take these inhalers every day, irrespective of they are having symptoms or not. Reliever or emergency medication is used as needed basis. So these are supposed to be taken by the patient for quick relief of bronchoconstriction and symptoms. That's why they are called emergency medication. So whenever a patient has exacerbation, whenever a patient has increased symptoms of cough and dyspnea, this is the time when you ask them to take the inhaler SOS on a as needed basis. So this is how we classify the asthma medication into controller and relievers. Controller medication include inhaled corticosteroids, long-acting beta agonist or LABAs in combination with an inhaled corticosteroid, leukotriene receptor antagonists such as montelukast, zafirlukast, and anti-IgE therapy. Reliever medication are the short-acting beta agonists, that is the SABA or inhaled anticholinergics. Coming to rapid-acting inhaled beta agonist, inhaled rapid-acting beta agonists are the preferred reliever medication for treatment of acute symptoms and should be prescribed to all patients with asthma. So even if your patient is not having any symptoms right now, you should prescribe a reliever medication, because whenever the patient comes in contact with the trigger, or if there's any other reason leading to exacerbation, so this is the medication which helps in instant relief of symptoms and avoids any complications such as hospitalization. SABA should be only be taken on a as needed basis for symptom relief and not to be taken on a regular basis. Increased use, that is if a patient is requiring SABA to be taken 3 or more times per week, it indicates that there is a fall in control of asthma symptoms, and this signals the need to reassess the treatment to achieve control of symptoms. Unlike other LABAs, formoterol has a rapid onset of action and therefore can be used for acute symptom relief. So the salbutamol was the first of the selective bronchodilators, relatively free from secondary effects. It was formulated as a PMDI and as a dry powder inhaler in the rotahilar and dischaler, and also as a nebulizer tablet and syrup formulation. Levosalbutamol, responsible for the same bronchodilation properties of salbutamol, and the pharmacological activity is achieved at half the dosage of salbutamol with minimal side effects. Beclomethasone. So in 1972, Allen and Hanbury's marketed the first inhaled steroid, which is beclomethasone, in the same inhalers as salbutamol, and numerous steroids have subsequently been developed, and some have led to new inhaler developments. So when it comes to low, medium, and high, beclomethasone in PMDI for standard particle, low is 200 to 500 microgram, medium is 500 to 1000, high is more than 1000. When it comes to beclomethasone extra fine particles, the low is 100 to 200 and the high is something above 400. So I'll shortly walk you through asthma management and treatment according to GINA. So there are various steps, that is step 1, step 2, step 3, 4 and 5. So first we'll go through the preferred controller. What you can see here on the left side written in orange is the preferred controller. So for step 1 is as needed low dose ICS formoterol. Step 2 is daily dose inhaled corticosteroid or as needed low dose ICS formoterol. Step 3 is low dose ICS LABA. Step 4 is medium dose ICS LABA, and step 5 is high dose ICS LABA. And according to phenotypic assessment, there is a requirement for an add-on therapy, which can be either tiotropium, anti-IgE, anti-IL-5, anti-IL-4R, and so on. Other options here, what we can see is low dose ICS taken whenever SABA is required in step 1, daily leukotriene receptor antagonist or low dose ICS whenever SABA taken, and so on for step 3, 4 and 5. And the preferred reliever is as needed low dose ICS formoterol or as needed low dose ICS formoterol for patients prescribed maintenance and reliever for step 1, 2 and 3, 4, 5 respectively. And other reliever option is as needed short acting beta 2 agonist, that is SABA. Similarly, there are guidelines set for children in the age of 6 to 11 years, and here also the reliever is as needed short acting beta 2 agonist, that is SABA. So there are various articles which have stated the superiority of combination of beclomethasone and salbutamol over standard dosing of salbutamol in the treatment of chronic asthma, which state that beclomethasone diapropionate in addition to salbutamol as a combination inhaler provides much better control of asthma than merely increasing the dose of salbutamol in those patients poorly controlled on standard dosage of inhaled bronchodilators. There are more studies which suggest that regular therapy using a combination inhaler is as effective as sequential administration of salbutamol and beclomethasone dipropionate. So the GINA guidelines for 2020 state that no longer there is any recommendation for SABA only treatment of asthma in adults or adolescents. So although inhaled SABA are highly effective for quick relief of asthma symptoms, patients whose asthma is treated with SABA alone are at risk of asthma related death and urgent asthma related healthcare. More clinical evidence stating the advantage of salbutamol and beclomethasone dipropionate in asthma, which state that it provides better recovery, whereas fall in serum potassium with MDI S plus B suggests use of spacer and monitoring of serum potassium during treatment. So in patients with mild asthma, symptom-driven use of inhaled beclomethasone and albuterol in a single inhaler is as effective as regular use of inhaled beclomethasone and is associated with lower 6-month cumulative dose of inhaled corticosteroid. So these are the various studies stating the advantage of this combination therapy. So shortly we'll again revise through this very important box which is for adult and adolescent treatment. So I'll walk you through again. The preferred controller medications are as needed low dose ICS plus formoterol, and the reliever here is as needed short acting beta 2 agonist and as needed low dose ICS formoterol. When it comes to children, the preferred controller for step 2 is daily dose low dose inhaled corticosteroid. We have to go according to the dose range for their children. Step 3 is low dose ICS LABA or medium dose ICS. Step 4 is medium dose ICS LABA, and step 5 is for phenotypic assessment, thus going on for add-on therapy. And the reliever here is as needed short acting beta 2 agonist. So coming to the take home message, I would want to specify on certain points when it comes to asthma management and prescribing medication to patients of asthma. So the first and the foremost point which should never be forgotten is the correct diagnosis. So you have to make sure that you have made the correct diagnosis for your patient. Uh, any mistake in diagnosing the patient or missing out on any comorbidities might lead to suboptimal therapy and might not give your patient the symptomatic relief that you want to see in the patient. So you have to diagnose the patient correctly. You have to stage the severity of asthma. You have to identify if your patient falls into stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. Because eventually when a patient of stage 2 uh, comes back on a follow-up with relief in symptoms, you can actually go for staging down, and if not, you can go for staging up. Then also you can start up, you have to start the appropriate treatment for the patient. And what is very important here is educating the patient. So what we often don't understand is asthma is a lifestyle oriented disease. So even if you're giving the right amount of medication to the patient, if the patient is not avoiding his or her triggers properly, or if the patient is not taking the medications properly, so there will be a suboptimal result. So your treatment will not be effective. So you need to educate the patient. You need to tell the patient what is asthma, what are the symptoms, what is an exacerbation, what is the role of a controller medication, what exactly is the role of a reliever or an emergency medication, what are the triggers that he or she should avoid. You are supposed to reassess the treatment. So when the patient comes back to you after a month or 2 months of uh, therapy, so you are supposed to ask questions like, is he having any difficulty with the inhalers, is he facing any difficulties with any side effects, is there any problem with the compliance. So you have to reassess the treatment and then decide whether you should step up or step down your asthma treatment strategy. It is very important that you spare 5 minutes of your time and check the inhaler technique. A patient can be on asthma treatment for a year and will not show any improvement if he's not taking the inhaler properly. And at times it is very important to understand your patient. So not every patient is same. Inhaler technique is a tailor made approach. So every patient will be requiring uh, his or her inhaler to be prescribed according to his or her ability to understand or and his physical ability to take the inhalers. So there are some clinical pers. So first thing that a question might come from your patient is that डॉक्टर साहब दवाई लेने से ठीक हो जाएगा क्या? Will I be completely cured by taking the medication? So this is something that the patient will always ask you when it comes to diagnosing asthma, especially pediatric population. So when you are diagnosing asthma in a pediatric population, the parents might ask you कि दवाई लेने से पूरा ठीक हो जाएगा क्या? So will it get completely cured on medication? So what we are supposed to say is that this is a lifestyle oriented disease. So like how a diabetic patient cannot see improvement in his symptoms unless and until he stops on his sugar intake. Similarly, an asthma patient needs to take medication but also needs to avoid all his triggers. So there are some lifestyle changes required when it comes to treatment of asthma. What is required is an asthma action plan between a doctor and a patient. So it is a combined effort between the doctor and patient. A good adherence can lead to decrease in medication. Many times the patient will ask you, is this a habit forming drug? So inhaler लेने से आदत लग जाएगी क्या? Will I get addicted to the inhaler? So your answer should be that if you take your medications properly, if you come for regular follow up, and if you avoid your triggers properly, there is a fair possibility that your medication can be decreased in future. You are supposed to tell the patient to identify his or her own triggers. You have to state how inhalers have an advantage. A very simple example that I give my patient is how when he or she has a problem in the eye, has an eye infection, so an eye drop is what works the best. If you have itching or burn on the skin, an ointment is what works the best. So similarly, when there is some problem in the airways, it is the inhalers which work the best. So you have to inform the patient in his own language, in his own terminologies. In Hindi, we often say, जो मलम लगा के जो इफेक्ट होता है वो गोली खाने से समय लगता है, वैसे ही इनहेलर का जो फायदा होता है वो गोली खाने से समय लगता है. तो देयर इज एन इनहेलर advantage which has to be communicated to your patient properly from you. And always understand that a well informed patient is a well treated patient. So a patient who knows what his disease is, what his symptoms are, and how he's supposed to take care of his exacerbations, when is he supposed to increase, uh, consult a doctor. So well informed patient is a well treated patient. So you have to educate your patient and inform him about his disease properly. So I would like to conclude by saying that a good physician is a physician who treats the disease, and a great physician is a physician who treats the patient who has the disease. Thank you. I suppose we are getting many questions from various doctors from all over India. We have time for question and answer, so I would like to invite you for more questions. The more questions you ask, the more clarity we can get on various treatment options when it comes to asthma. So there is a question which says chronic allergic rhinitis in food and its treatment. So okay. So see, I will not be discussing actually the treatment of chronic allergic rhinitis, but I can tell you that when you are treating patients of asthma, you are actually treating patients of allergy. So very often you might not get a patient who actually complains of breathlessness, or a patient who's been diagnosed of asthma before. But what he's complaining to you is basically recurrent chronic allergic rhinitis, uh, chronic complaints of running nose, chronic cough. So at times such a patient can be a patient of cough variant asthma. At times such a patient can be just a patient of pure chronic rhinitis, chronic pharyngitis. So what we need to do for such patients is what you can ask the patient to perform a PFT, that is a pulmonary function test. And if you see there is a bronchodilator reversibility, so this is a patient of asthma uh, coming as chronic cough, and inhaler therapy, the treatment protocol for asthma is the treatment suitable for such patient, even though the patient is only presenting as chronic allergic rhinitis. A role of food in chronic allergic rhinitis. There are certain foods that we know which are basically irritants, which can lead to increase in symptoms. Usually it's anything which comes out of the refrigerator, anything which is very cold, cold water, iced water, ice cream. These are certain foods which are triggers for symptoms of asthma. There are some questions related to coronavirus. I think we'll stick to our topic today, which is asthma therapy. I will not divert towards coronavirus therapy. How can we stop abuse of steroid in asthma? And there is another question, which is patient concern with steroid in asthma. Okay. So fine. I would. This is a very interesting question. Very often I come across patients who say that they are worried or they are apprehensive of taking an inhaler because there is steroid inside. डॉक्टर साहब ये इनहेलर में स्टेरॉइड है, इससे नुकसान तो नहीं हो जाएगा? So when you have a patient who's worried about the side effects of inhaled corticosteroids, so there are certain points that you can inform your patient. First is this is going through the inhaled route, so this is not going through the systematic route. So the adverse events are limited to minimum when it comes to inhaled corticosteroids. Secondly, the dosage of inhaled corticosteroid is at a very micro level, and it is just the optimal level to give you the right result. So there are very few chances of the patient actually having side effects when it comes to inhaled corticosteroids as compared to oral corticosteroids. Then there is a question on how can you stop abuse of steroid in asthma, is something that we have covered. When to start intravenous corticosteroid therapy? So usually these are the patients that we consider as difficult to treat asthma. So patients who are on optimal therapy, so you put a patient from stage 3 to step 3 to step 4, you've increased his inhaled corticosteroid dose to the maximum with LABA, uh, with adjuvant therapy, and the patient is not showing response, is the time when you can go for intravenous corticosteroid therapy. Also, patients who are coming to the ICU with exacerbation, are the patients who are suitable for intravenous corticosteroid therapy. How do you diagnose asthma in an early stage? Okay. So when it comes to diagnosis of asthma, first thing is a thorough history of the patient. So what are the symptoms of the patient? Are these symptoms variable? So does the patient have relative increase in cough, dyspnea, and breathing difficulty during certain days of the year, certain months of the year? Does it increase when he steps out of his home? Does it increase when he goes to work? Does it increase during rainy season? So this is first, your diagnosis tool is your history, and second, your confirmatory tool for diagnosing asthma is a lung function test, which is the PFT or spirometry. Is there permanent treatment for allergic asthma? Okay, so another question which is always discussed between the patient and the doctor: is there a permanent treatment for allergic asthma? As I mentioned before, this is a very important question when it comes to diagnosing asthma in a pediatric population. So the parents are very apprehensive that my child is only 6 years old. If we are starting him on inhalers, will it be a lifelong dependency? Is there any permanent treatment for allergic asthma? So the allergic part of the asthma, the allergic component is something which can completely brought under control, but can never be completely eliminated. So you have to be very frank with your patient in telling him or her that your disease can be completely controlled, but it cannot be completely eliminated if you are following your medications properly, if you're taking your treatment properly, avoiding your triggers, and coming for regular follow up. There is a fair chance that you will have complete control on your disease. Your medication dosage can be reduced. It might be stopped at a certain time after a year or 2 year, but there is a very high possibility of recurrence. So people who are completely controlled can have a possibility of stopping treatment, but there is a chance of recurrence after a year, after a few years, whenever the patient comes in contact with his or her own triggers. Very important question. Difference between COPD and asthma. Okay, so I'll keep it very short. And difference between COPD and asthma. First point: COPD will be seen after the age of 40 years. Any person presenting to you with symptoms of dyspnea, cough, mucus production, chest tightness below the age of 40 should be considered asthma and not COPD. Asthma has family inheritance. So if there's any history of asthma in the family, most probably it is asthma. COPD is not inherited. Third thing, smoker. So anybody who's been a smoker for more than 10 years, completing more than 10 pack years of smoking, is a person who can have COPD. Patients of COPD have a generally progressive disease. So once the symptoms start, the symptoms do not stop. They keep on increasing. Asthmatic patients have variable symptoms. So the patient might be symptomatic for 2 months and have complete relief for the next 2-3 months. So these are the various differences between COPD and asthma. You need to diagnose COPD and asthma differently and start treatment accordingly. Sir, can early institution of ICS in childhood onset asthma prevent the decline in lung function and airway remodeling? So when it comes to decline in lung function and airway remodeling, there are various factors. There are some genetic factors, environmental factors, but what we know, what we are in control of is proper treatment and treatment adherence. So when a patient is not taking his treatment properly for a very long time, or a patient is off medication for a very long time, these are the patients who now develop fixed airways. There is airway remodeling. They earlier have variability in their symptoms. They have phases of difficulty and phases of complete relief. Now they have fixed airways and they have absolutely no relief from them symptoms. Use of inhalers during pregnancy, lactation, any risk of acute bronchospasm and death due to MDR. Inhalers are relatively the safer drug of choice when it comes to pregnancy, only and only because most of it is local treatment. You are avoiding a lot of systemic route, as it is an oral inhalational therapy. It is local in its action. Um Risk of acute bronchospasm, very rarely seen that some patients might have acute bronchospasm during their first initiation of treatment, but very rare. There are many more questions coming up. Many of the questions are being repeated, almost the same that we have. There are more questions on pregnancy which we have discussed. Some patients complain that after taking milk, they feel more breathless. Is this true? At times, it might be because the milk is cold. So, cold liquids and cold food can actually lead to uh, some irritation in the throat, some coughing. What is technique to maximize effect of inhalers, MDI and Rotacap and newer inhalers? So every patient, as I said, requires a tailor-made approach. Most of the patients who are on MDI will be requiring a spacer for two reasons. Because when the patient is taking an MDI directly, the jet that comes out of the MDI, the spray that comes out of the MDI goes and hits the throat. This often leads to irritability, coughing, and constant deposition of this MDI ICS on the throat can lead to upper respiratory tract infection. So the spacer helps because when the patient attaches the inhaler to the spacer, the drug is actually revolving inside the spacer and it can be inhaled according to the breath of the patient, thus avoiding the jet hitting the back of the throat. And there is a decreased need for hand and breath hand and breath coordination. So many people at times when they are old or small children or for some other psychiatric reason, they are unable to take a breath at the same time when they are inhaling. So this is the time when the spacer actually is useful. You can actually take a puff and take your breath. So I think the maximization of an effect for MDI is through the spacer. Can budesonide inhaler be given in present COVID outbreak in asthma? So there are certain guidelines which have come for treatment of asthma and COPD during COVID outbreak. So what the guidelines say is treat your patients as and how you were treating them before. There is absolutely no need to change your treatment therapy for a patient of asthma when it comes to this COVID outbreak, because you are not sure that your patient is COVID or not, and you don't want your patient to go with suboptimal treatment of asthma and leading up in an asthma exacerbation, coming to the hospital back and maybe now getting a COVID infection. So you can continue your original line of treatment for asthma patients even in COVID. There are many questions. I'm choosing the best questions which can be useful for all of you over here. Why not to keep patients on long acting relievers and persistence instead of short acting salbutamol and beclomethasone combination? So when it comes to reliever therapy, the if your patient is under control, patient is not having increase in symptoms, you can and you should keep them on long acting reliever therapy. Which medicine should be given to pregnant women suffering from bronchiovascular prominent markings? So there is, when it comes to pregnancy, what we have learned with asthma is there is a rule of one third, one third, and one third. So one third of women who have asthma during a certain pregnancy can have relief in their symptoms of asthma. So consider a female who's been asthmatic through her life, maybe during her first or second pregnancy, one third of these patients will have decrease in their symptoms. One third of these patients might have the same symptoms, as in the asthmatic patient can have the same symptoms during pregnancy as they were before, and one third of these patients are those who can have increase in symptoms during pregnancy because of the physical changes in the body, the elevation of the diaphragm, and the hormonal changes in the body. So these are the variations that we see in pregnant women when it comes to asthma. Your best route of treatment is inhalational therapy. Avoid any kind of oral therapy when it comes to pregnancy. Are there any side effects of inhalational therapy on adolescent children? So when it comes to side effects of inhalational therapy, they are the same for children, adolescent, and adult age group. What we need to do for inhalational therapy is make sure you tell your patient to gargle every time he or she takes a inhaled corticosteroid. Gargling with just normal water is also good enough. What they are supposed to do is clear their throat, clear any deposition of inhaled corticosteroids on the posterior pharynx, and spit it out. So as long as the patient is uh, doing routine gargling after every puff of inhaled corticosteroids, he and she can actually avoid the side effect of URTI or cough. Role of immunotherapy in asthma, yes. So this is limited only for patients who are uncontrolled asthma, who have gone from step 1, 2, 3, 4 to 5. So this is where immunotherapy does have a role. There are certain limitations with immunotherapy, the first being cost. So when it comes to cost, it is very difficult to convince a patient to go for immunotherapy. It's very expensive. At times you need to find a patient of uncontrolled asthma, so you need to actually rule out any comorbidities. You need to rule out any chance that the patient is not taking his medication properly. So before you start any immunotherapy for patients of asthma, you need to make sure that yes, it is asthma, it is uncontrolled, there is no bronchiectasis or COPD or any other comorbidity. The patient is taking his and her medication properly. There is no suboptimal dosing of medication. The patient is avoiding all his or her own triggers. There is no exposure to dust, mite, change in weather. When you are very sure about all of this is when you can start the patient on immunotherapy, but you have to take efforts to convince the patient for the cost when it comes. When x-ray is to be done for patient of asthma, so x-ray is basically required when there is a increase in symptoms, when you see that there is any abnormal blood counts, when you are suspecting lower respiratory tract infection. So it is always wiser to go for an x-ray, just to make sure that what you are dealing with is only asthma and nothing else. Or if your patient of asthma has come with an exacerbation and has a secondary bacterial infection, so these are the times when a blood test and an x-ray are very essential in a patient of asthma. Patient is suffering from tonsillitis with acute bronchitis. Can I suggest steroid therapy? Yes, depending on if the patient is having relief with his antibiotic, if the patient is not having relief with his antibiotics, if he is actually avoiding his triggers, if he is taking his medicine properly, yes, you can go for steroid therapy. Any vaccinations to prevent asthma? So there are no vaccinations to prevent asthma, but definitely there are vaccines to prevent exacerbation of asthma. So what usually happens is people who are suffering from chronic respiratory diseases such as asthma and COPD, elderly population above the age of 50, are the people who are prone for lower respiratory tract infection, people who are prone for influenza. So these are the people above the age of 50 is when we recommend them to go for influenza vaccination once every year, pneumococcal vaccination once in 5 years. But theoretically, there is no vaccine to prevent asthma, but there are vaccines available to prevent lower respiratory tract infection in patients of chronic lung disease such as asthma. Any promising inhalational injectable drug coming in near future? I suppose yes, we are on the verge of finding a lot of new drugs. There are many which are now available as immuni which are now currently available at as immunotherapy. We will definitely be seeing more combination drugs when it comes to inhalation. There will be more improvement when it comes to drug delivery system. Now what we see are many breath accentuated inhalers which are relatively easy for the patient to operate with. They are single unit devices. There's no need to attach a spacer, and there is no need for a hand breath coordination because it is breath accentuated. So yes, I think this is an ever evolving branch when it comes to the treatment modalities. So when it comes to asthma treatment, we always have an advantage of more newer drugs coming every year. So many people are asking questions for patients who are already on ICS, SABA and LABA, and now they feel that there is no relief in her symptom and the patient is somewhat resistant to ICS, SABA and LABA. So yes, when we go through the GINA guidelines, I'll take you back to this screen. So patients who are basically now on step 5 of treatment and are not finding relief. So this is the patient who's on ICS LIBA. You need to assess them for their phenotype. What is their phenotype? Are they actually having neutrophilic or eosinophilic pathway? Is there these are the various phenotypes you need to assess. You need to assess for any comorbidities. You need to still go back to the patient and ask him if he's taking his medications properly or not, if he or she is avoiding the triggers. And that's when you can actually go for add-on therapy, which is basically tiotropium, anti-Ig, anti-IL-5, IL-4. Another question that I have received is role of um, role of pulmonary rehabilitation. So yes, there is a very strong role of pulmonary rehabilitation. So basically, patients with chronic lung disease, patients with asthma, COPD, bronchiectasis. So these are the patients who can be at a very good advantage if they are given the right chest physiotherapy advice, if they are put on pulmonary rehabilitation. So if you have the facility of pulmonary rehabilitation, or if you can refer your patient to a cardiorespiratory physiotherapist, your patient will show improvement in symptoms. There will be a decrease in the dosage that is required for your patient if there is a proper advice and proper uh, treatment from the physiotherapist. So yes, pulmonary rehabilitation has a very strong role when it comes to treatment of asthma. Okay, somebody is saying that it was a great lecture for basics, expecting same in future. So thank you for that. I believe that this meeting of today's has been important when as far as we are talking about how to diagnose asthma and how to treat asthma. And often there are some inhibitions. There is some reluctance when it comes to starting a patient on inhalational therapy. Quite often it is related to the cost. Sometimes it is related to some misbeliefs that patients have with uh, uh, with inhalational therapy. Very often patients are not happy to be labeled as asthma. So many times patients are happy to know that okay, they'll take medication for 6 months, but the moment you diagnose them as asthma, so is the time when they feel, oh my god, is it a lifelong disease? Am I gonna be stuck with these medications all my life? Should I change my doctor? Should I go for another doctor? Can I find a doctor who will tell me that this is not asthma? So this is the time where counseling actually plays a major role. This is actually the time where you have to sit down with the patient for 5 minutes, explain him what is actually the problem, what has happened in the airways, how inhalational therapy is going to work, how this is a disease which might stay very long, but the patient can be free of symptoms and can have reduced dosage of medicine if he or she takes the treatment properly. Very often we come across patients who follow up for 2 or 3 visits and then they get tired, they get disheartened, they are disappointed that they are been on treatment for 1 year and still they have been asked to continue treatment. So they go for alternative therapies. At times they go for homeopathy, ayurveda. um, they take treatment for 6 months, 1 year, and again they get disheartened that they are still continued on the same treatment, and they come back to you. So this is the time when you can actually explain your patient that your disease is something that is going to stay with you for a long time. It is more advantageous for the patient to stick to one doctor, take the right treatment, follow the right protocol, follow the asthma action plan, as in avoid all the triggers. If the patient has any complaints with the inhaler, he or she should communicate it to the doctor. You as a doctor can actually change the inhaler, maybe shift the patient from DPI to MDI, or maybe just check their inhaler technique, see if they're using the spacer properly or not. Ask them if they are doing throat gargling after the ICS. At times you might find that the patient has not understood the inhalational therapy at all. He is completely taking the medication in the wrong way. Maybe he or she is actually spraying it away from their mouth, not even holding it in their mouth. Or sometimes people are not changing their devices. So at times the Rotaheller or the Lupiheller, various devices that come, people use it for a year, 2 year, 3 year, and that is not the right practice. So you're supposed to tell your patient to change their device after every 6 months. They are supposed to clean it every week. Every Sunday they can clean the spacer, they can clean their Rotaheller, Lupiheller, let it dry, clean it with normal water, no need to use soap, let it dry, and then start using it again. So as I mentioned, there is a lot of involvement required from the doctor to understand what exactly is troubling the patient when it comes to treatment of asthma. You can have a patient who's been on medication for the past 1 year, but unfortunately he does not know that he's supposed to avoid dust at his work. He gets exposed to dust every day, and every 2 months he comes to you in exacerbation. So you need to sit down with patient, ask him where does he work, is there any dust around his home, is there any dust around his workplace, are there any animals, is there any type of grass around, does he feel more symptomatic when he's at home? Does he feel more symptomatic when he goes to work? At times, people are more symptomatic early morning when they go for a walk. At times, people are more symptomatic when they are driving a two-wheeler and they're exposed to vehicular pollution. So these are the times when you can actually intervene and ask them to do certain changes in their lifestyle so that they have symptomatic relief along with your treatment. Role of pranayama and yoga in asthma. So, see, when it comes to various treatment strategies, as I'd mentioned earlier, pulmonary rehabilitation and uh, physiotherapy has a proven role in treatment of asthma. I believe if your patient is very much uh, optimistic and driven with pranayam and yoga, you can ask them to continue there are certain papers which state that yes, there is an advantage of performing pranayama and yoga. But what you need to understand is your patient is doing what is best for his or her own clinical condition. Whatever is told on the television might not be suitable for each and every patient. So, according to the clinical status of the patient, that patient can perform some mild yoga exercises, pranayama exercises. There's absolutely no harm. What you need to do is you need to keep your patient in positive trust. During ANC, Montelukast plus fexofenadine is the combination safe. There are more papers stating safety profile of Montelukast with levocetirizine as compared to Montelukast with fexofenadine when it comes to cases of ANC. So I believe the answer for your question is Montelukast with levocetirizine is relatively more safer when it comes to ANC, but your first line of treatment still can be nasal sprays, avoiding any kind of systemic treatment. One question which is been repeated is please explain the role of ICS in management of chronic bronchitis. So when it comes to chronic bronchitis, again we need to just understand: are we talking about pure COPD chronic bronchitis, or are we talking about asthma which has been diagnosed as chronic bronchitis? So this is where the differentiation comes when it comes to role of ICS. So I think pulmonary function test is the first thing that you should go ahead with, just to diagnose whether you are dealing with a case of asthma or you are dealing with a case of COPD. Any more questions? I'm waiting for more questions. Any more questions from your side?
I think we'll be concluding now, sir.
Yes, sir. I suppose I've answered most of the questions that have come
Yeah.
across.
Yeah. In fact, thank on behalf of Lupin, first and the foremost, I would like to pay my gratitude and salute to all the doctors fraternity and also the doctors who have participating today for their awesome service that you are discharging towards the society at the time of this crisis. So once again, a big salute to all of you. Thanks a lot for all the doctors who have taken out time from their schedule of treating and managing COVID patients to upgrade their skills and knowledge, particularly about the inhalation therapy, which is the basic stage for asthma. And I'm very, very sure and I'm very confident that you all might have felt and a lot of take home message might be there for each one of us with the elaborate discussion and deliberation that is being done by Dr. Samir Arbat. I also take the opportunity to thank Dr. Samir Arbat. In fact, thanks is a very small word. Dr. Samir has always been a part and parcel of Lupin, very, very closely associated with Lupin. And we have been seeing him with great pride on the strides which he's been making in the field of intervention. And he's not only a name to reckon with in Central India at his tender age, but also internationally. So thank you very much, Samir. I cannot thank you more than this because it becomes very formal now to thank you. But I'm sure today with the enthusiasm which you have answered all the queries and with the interest which you have done, in fact, it will all take us a long way ahead. And as we have received a lot of questions that they want to have a continuation of this, so definitely on behalf of Dr. Samir, without even asking him, I assure all the doctors that definitely Dr. Samir will again be there for a webinar for upgrading our knowledge. And Apart from this, Lupin will always be there, side by side, shoulder to shoulder with the doctor's fraternity, be it knowledge, be it giving advantage to the patients. So thank you again. Thanks to the audience. Thanks to the doctors. And Dr. Samir, thank you very much for the
Thank you.
wonderful time you have spent. Thank you, sir.